reverse the damage to our brain that has already occurred due to negative risk factors such as stress, lack of physical activity, and alcohol?
Great question. The simple answer is yes, and let me give a little bit more detail on that. For people who have been actively drinking in an alcohol abuse or alcoholism kind of way, that is to say, lots of consequences from the drinking, and perhaps even are still drinking now. When you stop drinking, the damage stops. And depending on how long you've been drinking and what you've been drinking, the quantities you've been drinking, some of the damage is reversible. It looks like most of the damage related to alcohol use is due in large measure let me start over. For people who have alcoholism, who have an alcohol problem, and who drink and get a lot of their calories from alcohol, the problem with that is that you're missing some nutritional items that you need, some vitamins and minerals. And so people who drink to excess have a double whammy. One is the negative impact of alcohol on the brain per se, and then the second is the loss of nutrients. So for people in that extreme of things, the damage is reversible to some extent, largely related to nutrition, but the brain probably wouldn't get back to pre-alcohol days. For people who don't drink excessively, but who use alcohol and who now have become aware that as we age, our ability to tolerate alcohol actually diminishes. So whereas you might be somebody who was able to drink a couple of glasses of wine at dinner every day and not have any complications or anything else, 2 glasses of wine now for a woman is too much. It's too hard on the brain. 1 glass of wine a day over the age of 55 is the recommended amount. And a glass of wine is not a tumbler. A glass of wine is 5 ounces. I did this thing on this. I did a series of wellness, sort of public service things for senior centers many years ago. And one of my favorite things was to teach people what a drink was, a standard drink. And so I had a 12-ounce bottle of beer, and a 3-ounce glass of sherry, and a 5-ounce glass of wine, and a 1.5 shot of liquor, and said, that's a drink. Everything is a drink. Beer is a drink, wine is a drink, but the quantity, because of the alcohol content, varies. So then it looks like if you have no risk factors for alcoholism, don't take any medications, and don't have Alzheimer's disease or diabetes over the age of 55, men can still probably tolerate 2 drinks a day and no more than 7 a week. Those are, I'm pretty sure there's a booth out here. I think that's the National Institute on Aging recommendations, but it might have a little bit of a detail over. So for that, there's not really damage to the brain per se drinking at that level, but there's no benefit to the brain per se. This whole discussion about alcohol has gotten very confusing because there are some things that are good for your heart, like a glass of red wine. They're good for your heart, not so good for your brain. Terrible for your sleep. And yet there are still a lot of primary care docs who say, oh, excuse me, a little wine before you go to bed will help you go to sleep. True statement. But it disrupts the sleep architecture. So while you will fall asleep, you will not stay asleep. And you will not sleep deeply enough. So alcohol bedtime is definitely annoying. So that's kind of a long answer about the alcohol. With respect to the effects of stress, that negative effect is totally reversible. And so even if you've had a stress-filled life and are just now getting sort of grips on it and under control, total merit in reversing the effects of stress there. And the third piece of that is, physical activity, or physical inactivity. The issue about physical inactivity is not that you've been doing brain damage or hurting the brain, it's that you haven't been helping it. So, so any physical activity will help the brain. And this is particularly true for people also who have a little bit of perhaps a predisposition for depression or have actually suffered from clinical depression, exercise is excellent for preventing a recurrence of depression. And probably part of the reason that is true is because of the positive effects of exercise, particularly on the hippocampus, which is part of a series of structures that are related to emotional regulation. So, bottom line, always merit the starting, even if you're just started down. And we will reverse the sum and improve everything. That's the simple answer.
Erickson's 8 stages of development ended with people in their 70s. Since the lifespan is extending 20 or even 30 years beyond that, would you add a 9th stage, and if so, what would you call it?
What a great question. Who wants to co-author that book with me? Are you going to ask her that question? Whoever wants to, that book is waiting to be written. I'm not sure what to call it. You know, Erickson did stop at 70. And Gene Cohen, which you received as your book this year, which I really encourage you to read, talks about the 50s to 60s, 60s to 70s, 70s to 80s, and the 80s beyond. And he calls that the stages beyond that, the encore for the 80s and beyond, summing up, liberation, and reevaluation. So the way I look at it, but I would love to frame it, is that what I think Gene Cohen has done with Erickson's last stage, for those of you who are familiar with it, basically Erickson wrote a book called Childhood and Society, in which he talked about what he saw as the 8 stages of man, which is every crisis that becomes an opportunity in developmental task, getting dust out at 70, was something he calls ego integrity. And in that ego integrity, he says that basically you look back and say, this is my life, I did it my way. It's the only one I got, and it's unique, and I'm not proud of everything, but I did some good things, and so on. I think what Cohen would say, although he doesn't exactly talk about it this way, is that that 9th stage is really an elaboration on ego integrity. It really is about summing up. And that summing up and encore, 70s and beyond, I think happens if you embrace the developmental task of 50 to 60, 60 to 70 of reevaluation. I'm only going to get one. I only have so much time. If not now, then when? And that kind of tees you up, I think, to actually do the summing up and encore phase. And then at the end of that, whatever age that is, you have a richer ego integrity. That's the way I think about it. But we should write the book.
There is a book called No Rocking Chair for Me.
I'm sorry, say
there,
it.
this is the person, where's the person? You raise your hand, I'll give you the mic. It's a book called No Rocking Chair for Me. It was in yesterday's New York Times. And the book was No Rocking Chair for Me by Jane Tuttle. And Jane Brody, who writes on personal health every Tuesday, wrote all the articles about people who are 99 plus.
Excellent.
100, 150. So no rocking chair for me if you want to try to find it. I don't know where I would find it.
Thank you so much. I'm not familiar with that book.
Just Google it.
But I'll
Amazon.com.
Okay.